welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be discussing Shakespeare's Hamlet, and we're going to be specifically looking at each of the main characters and discussing some of their key traits. So we obviously have to start with the protagonist himself, Hamlet. So Hamlet is a tragic hero. He's an overthinker, he's indecisive, he's intellectual, he's an academic. He's a complex character and he is extremely contemplative. So a tragic hero is typically a protagonist. Typically they're well-respected, noble, intentioned people, and they have one fatal flaw, and that fatal flaw leads to their demise. So Hamlet has Hamlet's fatal flaw is his indecisiveness, and that ultimately leads to his death. So Hamlet is extremely indecisive. He is an overthinker to the point where he is led towards inaction in his delay to act against Claudius. So when he is given the instruction to avenge his father by the ghost of King Hamlet, he really wants to do it because in those times that was the noble, honorable thing to do. It was that you avenged someone's death and you killed the perpetrator. And so he wants to kill Claudius, and there's really no love lost between him and Claudius, but he wants to be absolutely certain about how it happened, why it happened. He wants all the different facts. He's very much an intellectual and academic in that regard. And so he keeps delaying it, and he keeps being indecisive about how he should kill him, why he should kill him, etc. Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play, and I think a lot of the reason is because of Hamlet himself. A lot of the times we are taken away from the plot with Hamlet's long soliloquies about life and death and circumstance and all these different things. So he's a really fascinating character, and we need to understand him in terms of the plot, but also in terms of the comments about life and death that he brings to the table. Claudius is our antagonist. He is a master manipulator. He manipulates Gertrude, he manipulates Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, he manipulates Hamlet to an extent, and he definitely manipulates Laertes in the final two acts. He is ruthless and untrustworthy, so he is very clearly our antagonist, and I think it's quite interesting that you have a very clear, obvious antagonist, and yet you have a protagonist who is unable to act against him. Then we have Gertrude. Gertrude is Hamlet's mother, who also is married to She marries Claudius soon after the death of King Hamlet. She is disempowered and weak. So my argument about the women in this play is that they're not perceived to be strong at all. They're actually, they're put in quite a disempowering position because our two main female characters, Gertrude and Ophelia, are both seen to be disempowered, and Hamlet makes remarks about them, very degrading remarks about their intelligence and about their sort of status. He really does not have any respect for Gertrude at all, which is easy to see why, because she goes from King Hamlet to Claudius very quickly. She doesn't seem to think there's anything wrong with that, and if you read even just Act 1, you can see that mounting anger that Hamlet has for his mother Gertrude. King Hamlet, or the ghost. So this is the ghost of Hamlet's father who sets the whole plot for revenge in motion. He comes in Act 1 and he won't talk to anyone except for Hamlet. And this is significant because, well, we can understand that maybe nothing would have been done if it wasn't for the ghost actually giving Hamlet an inkling of how his death was actually carried out, that it was Claudius who killed him, and asking his son to avenge him. Now, ghosts in Shakespeare are very common, and it was a sort of different time where the presence of ghosts wasn't something questionable like we think of it today. So obviously, if you think about the symbolism of a ghost, unfinished business, Hamlet's father cannot rest, his killer is still out there, who has actually married his wife as well and taken over his kingdom. So just understand the ghost, as much as it's seems supernatural, and it is, it was a lot more acceptable during Shakespeare's time. Then we have Horatio. Horatio is Hamlet's confidant. He talks to him and as much as Claudius thinks Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Hamlet's friends, Horatio is actually the one person who Hamlet sort of vents to and contemplates life and death. And Horatio is the one who actually informs Hamlet of the ghost in the first place. Then we have Polonius. He is a servant in the royal household in Elsinore, in the Palace of Elsinore, Denmark. But he is quite a manipulative mastermind, and he's incredibly nosy, which is how he dies, by being nosy. He is Laertes and Ophelia's father, and he believes that Hamlet is in love with Ophelia, and he plots with Claudius in order to prove this point. He manipulates Ophelia into saying certain things to Hamlet, and he actually, when he dies, he is hiding behind a tapestry in Gertrude's room, and beforehand he's trying to convince her to go harshly on Hamlet, and Hamlet hears a disturbance and thinks that Claudius, goes and stabs him, but it's actually Polonius. And this is obviously important for later events because Laertes is going to return from university as a result of his father's death and start plotting against Hamlet. Ophelia, Laertes' sister, Polonius' daughter, Hamlet's supposed love interest. She becomes deeply depressed. We do have this understanding that there is a connection between Ophelia and Hamlet, but Hamlet, in his quest to feign madness, really rebukes her in a heart-wrenching, violent way, and she descends into this depression that when Laertes arrives home, he's like quite irritated or frustrated with the fact that she's the way she's become. She's also deeply affected by her father's death, it seems, but mainly by Hamlet's cutting words towards her. And she eventually drowns, and that gives Laertes even more impetus to get revenge on Hamlet because he blames her madness on Hamlet. So you can see the theme of madness swooping in or coming into many different characters. So Laertes, he is Ophelia's brother, and he is manipulated by Claudius. So when he arrives back from university, Claudius manipulates him into believing that Hamlet is at fault for absolutely everything, and they come up and they devise a plan as to how they're going to destroy Hamlet. But in that process, Laertes, during the duel, Laertes is also going to die. So it is a true Shakespearean tragedy in terms of many different characters dying. He is obviously heartbroken by his father's death and then Ophelia's death, and he wants to get revenge on Hamlet. And as much as he's heartbroken about his father and his sister, it's also about honor, and I'll talk about that when I talk about the themes in another video. But this idea of honor, he needs to protect his family's honor and his own honor by fighting Hamlet and ensuring that Hamlet that he can avenge, just like Hamlet is tasked with avenging his father's death. He needs to avenge his father and sister's death to protect his honor. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two of my favorite characters. They're Hamlet's childhood friends who are fooled by his madness and manipulated by Claudius. A lot of the comedy comes through them because they are totally oblivious to the fact that they are being manipulated by Claudius into finding out what's wrong with Hamlet, but also they're being manipulated by Hamlet because Hamlet makes them believe that he's totally mad. So they're really quite entertaining characters, and they really have no substance, and they're really quite stupid in terms of not understanding how they're being manipulated. Osric is not such an important character, but for some reason in the DBE papers, they ask this for contextual questions. I've seen it a few times. So Osric is the messenger who comes to tell Hamlet about Laertes' jewel that he's offering him. And they just have this brief interaction where Hamlet sort of makes fun of Osric's stupidity. They just have a small back and forth, but if they ask you about Osric, he's the messenger who delivers the news to Hamlet that Laertes wants a duel. And lastly, Fortinbras, he is the king of Norway who takes over Denmark at the end of the play. He's introduced right at the beginning as there's this sort of whole history with Norway and Denmark. And later on in the play, as Hamlet is dying, Fortinbras arrives to take over. He is quite honorable in the sense that as Hamlet's dying, he promises that Hamlet shall have a, well, not as he's dying, but after he dies, after Hamlet has proclaimed, he wishes to be remembered in a certain way, then Fortinbras grants him a sort of hero's funeral. I hope that was helpful. I'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be unpacking some of the key themes in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. So the first theme we need to unpack is the theme of honor and reputation. This is a very important theme in this play, and it drives the entire plot, because the entire reason why Hamlet seeks to avenge his father is to preserve Hamlet's own honor and reputation, but also his father, King Hamlet's honor and reputation. So this theme of honor and reputation is absolutely critical to understand in terms of the plot. Furthermore, we can see other people's honor and reputation and how they hold on to the different characters. Claudius, for instance, he wants to preserve his honor and reputation. He doesn't want to be found out as being the killer of King Hamlet. You also see this with Gertrude, and Hamlet shames Gertrude for her honor and her reputation because he believes she has made a mistake in just marrying Claudius so quickly after King Hamlet died, that she has now given up or tainted her honor and reputation due to this decision. Laertes, at the end of the play, when he goes and he challenges Hamlet to a duel, it's about obviously his grief for his father and sister, but even more than that, it's this idea of honor. He needs to avenge these deaths. He needs to fight Hamlet. He needs to, they have to have this fight to the death in order to preserve each of their honors and reputation. So this is a critical theme that cannot be overstated. Any Shakespeare play always has this theme at its heart, because it was such a central thing back in those times. And so this is a critical one because it prompts a lot of the plot developments to occur. The next theme is the theme of betrayal. And so we see this with a couple of different instances in Hamlet. So firstly, the obvious one is Claudius betrays King Hamlet by killing his own brother in order to usurp the throne. We also see this in terms of Gertrude. Hamlet believes that she has betrayed him as well as his father by marrying Claudius so quickly. You see the betrayal between Hamlet and Ophelia, because one minute he acts like he loves her, and then the next minute he is saying terrible things to her. We also see this with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and we're going to link that to the theme of manipulation later. But Claudius manipulates Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to try and get, the truth out of Hamlet as to why he's going mad or gone mad. And the way that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are working together with Claudius shows this theme of betrayal. They are betraying Hamlet by pretending to continue being his friends. Even though Hamlet doesn't fall for it, it's still a form of betrayal. Gender roles. So this is an important theme, and it has come up as an essay topic in the past. And so at gender roles, there's this theme of masculinity, which is linked to the reputation and honor, but also the female characters in Hamlet are not perhaps portrayed in the best light. They are quite weak characters, in my opinion. So if you look at Gertrude, she just easily is manipulated by Claudius. She marries him very soon after King Hamlet's death, and even though she attempts to put Hamlet in his place after she watches the play within a play, she attempts to sort of berate him and put him into place, but ultimately I think Hamlet comes off better, or not better. He kills Polonius, but she doesn't really get her message across, and Hamlet really does insult her. So yeah, he has absolutely no respect for her. So as our protagonist, if he doesn't have any respect for her, that sort of mirrors the character evolution. And then we see Ophelia, and Ophelia is also, she's very weak, she's easily manipulated. She's manipulated by Polonius, her father, and Claudius at the beginning of the play to talk to Hamlet, and they tell her what to say. And then when Hamlet rejects her, she dives into this depression, and also after her father's death. And actually, like, Laertes gets like sort of irritated with her when she starts talking all in riddles, and she's singing, and so she descends into madness. So if we look at the gender roles, if we look at the female characters, we don't really see that many strong female characters. And then the male characters, we see them very much portray that stereotypically masculine trait of, wanting honor, wanting revenge, things like that. The next one is guilt and revenge. So guilt and revenge linked to honor and reputation as well, but there's the sense that Hamlet, obviously, he's trying to avenge his father, he's trying to get revenge, and also he's trying to prove who the guilty party is, who is responsible for this, and then he needs to enact revenge upon them. Laertes as well, at the end of the play, he knows that Hamlet is guilty of killing Polonius, and he also thinks that he's guilty of killing Ophelia, maybe not directly, but through his words, and so he therefore needs to go and attain revenge. Power and ambition, also critical themes that drive the entire progression of the plot. So Claudius's desire and ambition for power drives him to go and kill his own brother in order to usurp the throne. He doesn't perhaps think of the consequences of the fact that King Hamlet's son will try and avenge him, or figure out the truth in any way. So power can be extremely blinding in this case. So that is a significant theme as well. And I think also Claudius, because he has the power, and this is going to link to the theme of manipulation, but because he has power, he is able to manipulate so many different situations. So he's able to manipulate Laertes because he's the king of Denmark. He's able to manipulate Rosencrantz and Guildenstern because how could they say no? He is the king. So this idea of power is significant. Violence, this is a tragedy, so most of our main characters do end up dying at the end of the play in violent ways, not in natural deaths at all. So, I mean, the play starts with violence with the murder of King Hamlet, or we're told about the murder of King Hamlet, and it ends in utter tragedy where, Hamlet dies, Laertes dies, Gertrude and Claudius die, all in this final battle scene. And before that, you had Polonius's death and Ophelia's death. Manipulation. So this is a key theme that we need to discuss. So Claudius, obviously, as we discussed earlier, he manipulates so many different people. One could argue that Hamlet does manipulate some people. I mean, he manipulates Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and that links to our next theme, which is going to be misinterpretation. So I'll talk more about Hamlet then. But in terms of manipulation here, I think we definitely need to talk about Claudius. He manipulates the entire situation. If you read like one of the first scenes in Act 1, he talks about, now we have to stop grieving for King Hamlet. We need to move on. We should celebrate my wedding to Gertrude. So he manipulates the entire situation so that he is in control, that he is powerful. He manipulates Hamlet's destiny and future. He wants to send him to his death. And so, yeah, manipulation and Claudius definitely go hand in hand. Another character who showcases this is Polonius. Polonius is quite a nosy character. He gets involved in things that maybe he shouldn't get involved in. He manipulates Ophelia, his own daughter, and he puts like her emotions and feelings on the line when he gets her to talk to Hamlet and to say certain things, puts her at this risk. And also he tries to manipulate Gertrude earlier. He says to her, like, when they're walking to her room after the play within a play, and Gertrude's really angry and says, call for Hamlet, he tries to tell her, like, you should go harsh on him. So manipulation is a key theme. The next one is misinterpretation, and this is going to link to our theme of madness quite extensively, because a lot of the play is about the characters' misinterpretation of Hamlet's actions. They never know where they stand with Hamlet. They don't know what's going on with Hamlet. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern misinterpret Hamlet as being completely mad, when we know that at the beginning, Hamlet actually says to Horatio, I'm going to pretend to be mad. I don't know if he says it to Horatio, if it's in a soliloquy, but it's right towards the beginning of the play. And he says that he's going to be mad, he's going to act mad in order to get the truth out, in order to avenge his father. So a lot of his actions are misinterpreted in this instance. I think also Laertes could have misinterpreted Hamlet's killing of Polonius, but that is something of an opinion, because it is cold-blooded murder in any case. But misinterpretation is clearly with regard to Hamlet. Appearance versus reality. This is a theme that carries throughout Shakespeare's works, what appears to be one thing versus the reality that it is. So Hamlet appears to be mad. In reality, he is plotting, or he is trying to avenge his father, and he's putting on this act of being mad. Claudius appears to be virtuous and, just an ordinary king. In reality, he is manipulative and violent and evil. So appearance versus reality is a critical theme. Action versus inaction, which links to the theme of decisiveness or indecisiveness. As we spoke about in the characters video, Hamlet is so indecisive and so concerned with finding out the truth and finding the perfect situation in order to kill Claudius and attain his revenge, that it actually is there's more inaction than action in the play. A lot of the play is just Hamlet thinking things through and having debates with himself and contemplating different ideas and strategies and procrastinating actually putting into action this revenge plan. And interestingly, when Claudius finally does die, and when Hamlet finally is involved in some action, it's not of his own doing. He's been invited to this duel by Laertes. So action versus inaction. You can see Claudius also embodies action. He does things. He kills King Hamlet. He marries Gertrude. He manipulates Laertes into setting up this duel, versus Hamlet, who encapsulates inaction. He's talking a lot. He's procrastinating. He's indecisive. He doesn't act until the final act. Then we have the theme of madness, and one of the big debates with Hamlet is, does he really go mad, or is he still just pretending to be mad for the sake of finding out the truth? So that is something that you can think of and you can find evidence for. Remember, if you do write it in an essay about madness, you need to have evidence for why you say that he's totally gone mad or that he's still pretending to be mad. So you need to find that evidence and understand your standpoint even before you go into the exam. Understand whether you do think he goes mad or whether he doesn't. But I think that, you can really argue both. At the beginning, as I mentioned earlier, he does say he's going to pretend to be mad in order to, continue on this complex plot of his to avenge his father. But ultimately, maybe he does turn a little bit mad because he becomes so caught up in his own thoughts and so caught up in procrastination and not actually pulling the trigger, that maybe there is a sense of madness that overwhelms him. And madness is not just does not just concern Hamlet, but it can also concern Ophelia, because we see how she slowly turns depressed, and then she's like singing and not making full sentences, and she also becomes mad. And so it's important to look at the different things that make people mad, perhaps. And this idea of madness is quite interesting, I think, in terms of a play, because really you could argue that any of the characters are mad. You can think of Claudius as being mad because he is he's not frivolous, but he's very cavalier, and he's done this terrible thing without thinking it through. You can think of Laertes as mad because he's consumed with grief and consumed with anger and revengeful ideas. You can think of Gertrude as mad for the decision she makes. So definitely focus on Hamlet and Ophelia here for madness, but you can see how this can really be extended into the different definitions of madness. The next theme is the complexity of truth, and this is significant, and it's quite a tricky theme to fully unpack, but just something for you to think about as you're writing. I don't think you're going to get an essay topic about the complexity of truth, but sort of the idea of what is the truth, and I think Hamlet leaves us with a lot of questions more than answers. Who was supposed to do this? Who was supposed to do that? I mean, if we just look at Hamlet and Ophelia's relationship, we can understand there's so much conflict and there's so much complexity in terms of whether Hamlet likes her, whether Hamlet doesn't like her. Nothing is clear cut. The same with Hamlet's relationship to Gertrude or to Claudius. Nothing seems to be clear cut. It's all about this appearance versus reality. Hamlet never, outright goes against Claudius, but he feels it within and he's plotting his revenge. Hamlet also, he directs this acting troupe to have this play within a play to mirror the events of the truth. Yes, by seeing the actor kill the other actor or the other character in the play to showcase Claudius's killing of King Hamlet. But we see how there's a complexity to it, because maybe that's not exactly how it happened, but it happened along those lines. And so what we're led to believe is quite significant. We also don't really fully understand the extent to which Gertrude knows about certain things. So understanding with Hamlet, and a lot of it links to the next theme, which is contemplation, is we're contemplating questions, the big questions in life. We're contemplating the plot lines within the story, but also the broad questions that life has to offer. Next, we have contemplation and indecision. We've spoken about indecision, so I'm going to talk more about contemplation here. As I said, Hamlet is always going on these long soliloquies where he talks about life and death and all different things, and a lot of famous quotes, a lot of famous Shakespeare quotes come from these soliloquies, come from Hamlet, because it's not just about the plot, but it's about his reflections on life and his contemplation of the themes associated with his life. So he contemplates death and dying, he contemplates life and whether life, what makes a life meaningful. And so contemplation is a key aspect, and that's what sort of distracts him from carrying out his plot, but it is something so integral to his character. And lastly, life and death. All these contemplations are about life and death, because those are the two fundamental aspects of the play, but also the fundamental aspects of the human existence is life and death. Our life and death. So Hamlet really contemplates these things. We see it carried out in the plot. We see how they all die at the end, and how that is, this tragic ending. But also we can understand by the ending, where Forntress grants Hamlet a hero's funeral, that your life's legacy can maybe live beyond death. I hope that was helpful. Please like the video if it was, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be summarizing the first act of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So Act 1, Scene 1 starts with a group of watchmen or guards, Marcellus, Francisco, and Bernardo, and they are changing shifts. And Marcellus has brought Horatio with him because he wants Horatio to witness a ghost which has visited already twice. In the last 2 nights this ghost has visited, and the ghost seems to be in the appearance of the recently deceased King Hamlet. Horatio is a nobleman, he's a scholar, he's one of Hamlet's friends, and he is quite skeptical about the ghost appearing. He doesn't really believe Marcellus, but then the ghost actually appears and Horatio sees this for himself. And so the guardsmen, the watchman, and Horatio, they talk together and they try and figure out what this means. And the men predict that the ghost appearance means bad news for Denmark. So just to remind you, when we're talking about King Hamlet, we're talking about our protagonist's father, who has been killed, and we're later going to find out he was killed by his brother Claudius. And the son, Hamlet, the protagonist, he is the one who is going to try and enact revenge. So just to keep in mind, the ghost is an image of King Hamlet, referring to Hamlet's father. And while they're talking, Horatio describes King Hamlet's rivalry with King Fortbris of Norway and how King Hamlet killed King Fortbris and captured his territories. So we are alerted to sort of the goings on in Denmark and sort of the history that leads to the current threat and why the guards are even on watch is because that King Fortbris's son, who is also called Fortbris, he is Denmark's new threat. So after King Hamlet killed King Fortbris of Norway, obviously King Fortbris's son sort of had started plotting for revenge to recapture his territories and to enact revenge on Denmark. So that's the new threat that is upon Denmark at the moment. So that's important to understand for the storyline as well. So in Act 1, Scene 1, obviously there's a lot of throughout the whole act, really, there's a lot of groundwork being laid in terms of the background that's going to become quite important as we continue on throughout the story. So already we have this theme of revenge coming through, and we haven't even discussed the main sort of iteration or the main way in which this theme of revenge is seen, which is through Hamlet and his mission against Claudius. But already we're seeing this whole Fortbris storyline, which is very interesting, as we'll talk about later, because of its parallels to Denmark's goings on in sort of the political or royal family. The ghost then returns, but is scared away, and Horatio says that he will tell Hamlet, and he says he'll do it out of duty and out of love. So we can see that Horatio really does care for Hamlet, but also it introduces the theme of duty to the play. And as we know from if you've studied any other Shakespeare plays, you know that honor, duty, reputation, all these ideas are really important in Shakespeare's plays, in every society in which we discuss, in every society in which we analyze within Shakespeare's plays. The theme of honor and duty and doing what's right is very, very important. And obviously that's also going to actually link up to the theme of revenge, but let me wait until we get to that point and then I can explain it to you. Act 1, Scene 2. So now we go back into the palace, in Denmark, and Claudius is proclaiming that while King Hamlet's death is sad, things need to move on. So Claudius has become the new king after his brother King Hamlet has died, and he has gone and married King Hamlet's wife, Hamlet's mother, Gertrude, very soon after the death of King Hamlet. And so he proclaims to a group of people that, now is time for mourning is over and we need to move on and sort of live our lives and be conscious of the threats that are sort of upon us right now. So we need to move on. He acknowledges Fortbris's threat and he sends a letter to Fortbris's uncle who took over power after after his brother King Fortbris's death. So we really have parallels to the Denmark situation, because King Fortbris was killed, and instead of his son Fortbris becoming king, the power went to his uncle, to King Fortbris's brother. The same thing in Denmark, right? King Hamlet has died. Instead of the power going to Hamlet, his son, it has gone to Claudius, Hamlet's uncle, King Hamlet's brother. So we definitely see those parallels, and we also see the disconnect between what Fortbris's uncle wants versus what Fortbris wants, and we're going to see that same disconnect between what Hamlet wants and what Claudius wants. Laertes, who is Polonius's son, who is very sort of high up in the court or in the world of the Danish sort of royal family, he's very much friendly and an advisor to Gertrude, very high up within the family. And his son Laertes requests permission from Claudius to return to France because he had come from France back to Denmark for the coronation, and now he requests to go back. And Claudius permits this. Claudius and Gertrude then see Hamlet, and they admonish him and condemn him because he is still in mourning. So he's still wearing black clothes, and they're telling him he's being very dramatic and even unmanly to still be mourning his father. And Hamlet's absolutely very angry. And Hamlet's anger towards his mother and Claudius is very much evident. Obviously, he doesn't know that Claudius has killed his father yet, but he's very upset at Claudius marrying his mother so quickly after his father's death, and he has no respect for either of them, and he really wants to mourn his father. He really loved his father, and he doesn't see it as crazy or strange the fact that he's still mourning for them. He sees the fact that Claudius and Gertrude have moved on so quickly as extremely problematic, and he's extremely angry about that. Hamlet finds life meaningless and angrily reflects on recent events that have transpired. And that's when, while he's by himself and he's having these reflections about what life truly means, I remember the whole of Hamlet is such an interesting play because it's Shakespeare's longest play, and really to me there's sort of two different elements. So you have the plot line, which we're talking about now, but then you also have a lot of like philosophical conversations and soliloquies where Hamlet is talking about life and the meaning of life and different aspects of life. So throughout the play, just make note of that, like what's important for plot, and then what's important in terms of just philosophical, interesting things. But in the same way, those philosophical and those interesting things really do add to our understanding of Hamlet and his state of mind. So Horatio and Marcellus come in and they tell Hamlet of the armed ghost of King Hamlet that appeared. And Hamlet is intrigued. He asks them a bunch of questions and he says, "Please keep it a secret. Don't tell anyone that you've seen the ghost." And he then reflects that he thinks something must be wrong if his father's ghost is appearing. So something just to add is that I know these days we're sort of very skeptical about ghosts and things like that, but in those times it wasn't seen as very sort of abnormal. It was quite normal to assume that if there was a ghost walking around, there was some sense of unfinished business. So it wasn't sort of as peculiar, I think, as what we would think of ghosts today. Scene 3. Laertes says goodbye to his father Polonius and his sister Ophelia as he leaves for France. And here we have the introduction of Ophelia, and we hear about how Hamlet has been paying attention to Ophelia and spending time with her. And Laertes warns Ophelia to stay away from Hamlet, and he gives a bunch of reasons as to why, which we won't get into now, but when I do the quotes video, hopefully soon, I'll explain to you all those different reasons using those quotes and what Laertes says to Ophelia why she should stay away from Hamlet. Polonius then offers Laertes advice as he leaves, and some famous lines really come from that advice he gives his son. And once Laertes leaves, Polonius then says to Ophelia, like, "What were you talking about with Laertes?" And Ophelia says, "Laertes was talking to me about Hamlet," and Polonius tells Ophelia off for spending time with Hamlet and thinking his affections to be true. She says, "He's not being truthful. You're just sort of like a passing thing for him. You shouldn't be spending time with him." And he really condemns her. And this is really important because this is going to develop later on. And Polonius really plays with Ophelia's feelings and he really disregards Ophelia's feelings, which is really horrible to see. But in this scene, he's very like strict with her and very, condescending as well, because he tells her basically she's misread the whole situation, that Hamlet's not interested in her and she should make herself less available to him. And we can also see this theme of sexism and gender coming in because of how Laertes and Polonius demand Ophelia does certain things, even though she's her own person and she could make her own decisions. Polonius and Laertes really condemn her into these sort of strict parameters and tell her off for being for being careless in how she spends her time, or what other people think of her as well. So then we also had that theme of appearance versus reality, because Laertes mentions to Ophelia, "Look how it's looking to everyone else. It's looking like you've lost your virtue because you're spending so much time with Hamlet, and that's going to hurt your reputation." So we have all these themes coming in just this little scene between this family. Act 1, Scene 4. Hamlet waits with Horatio and the guards for the ghost of midnight. The ghost appears, but still won't talk, and the ghost beckons for Hamlet to join him alone. The others try and convince Hamlet it's a bad idea to speak to the ghost alone because it's dangerous, but Hamlet doesn't care. He sort of reminds them what he says earlier, like life is pointless to him. He's really quite depressed, but he lands up following the ghost anyway, despite their objections. And finally, in Scene 5, the ghost actually speaks to Hamlet when they are alone, and he confirms that he's the ghost of Hamlet's father, King Hamlet. He instructs Hamlet to take revenge for his murder, and he explains how Claudius killed him by pouring poison in his ear and then betrayed him by marrying Gertrude. He explains how he had no time to repent, and so now he has to walk the earth as a ghost. So this is a really important piece of information, just to understand the sort of religious connotation of, if you don't have enough time to repent, then you sort of go into you don't go straight to heaven, right? You have to have a period of repentance. And this is pretty important for later on when we're going to see when Hamlet has the opportunity to kill Claudius and he chooses not to, so that Claudius won't go straight to heaven as he's in the middle of praying. So keep that in mind for a later scene. But we can see here how King Hamlet has been, has been betrayed, how he's been killed by his brother, and sort of now he's in a very bad situation. The ghost tells Hamlet to take revenge on Claudius, so he says you must go and get rid of that villain, take revenge on him, but he warns Hamlet, leave your mother out of it. So even though he feels betrayed by Gertrude, he feels more betrayed by Claudius, and he says to Hamlet, leave your mother out of it. Hamlet declares that he will act on the ghost's wishes. This is quite important because we're going to see later on, obviously, Hamlet is plagued by inaction and indecision, right? He can't make up his mind and he doesn't really act, he procrastinates, but in the moment, he's actually very clear on what he wants to do. And he says he is going to act on this and he is going to make sure that Claudius pays for what he's done. The ghost disappears, and then Hamlet actually refuses to tell Horatio and Marcellus what the ghost told them and makes them swear to never mention the ghost to anyone. And furthermore, he says, no matter how crazy or mad he starts to act, that they must not tell anyone of this night. And this is a nice little piece of foreshadowing, and it's a really interesting point because later on we're obviously going to see Hamlet sort of go into this state of madness where he starts acting crazy. And it's important to note that Hamlet does tell them he's going to act crazy because at some point we're going to be like, hold on, is Hamlet acting mad or has he literally gone mad now? So this is an important reminder that maybe he's just acting all along. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. As I said, I'm going to try and make some quotes videos as well. And I have a video on some of the main themes and characters in Hamlet, which I hope you will watch as well to supplement your learning. Please remember to like this video, to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we're going to go through some key points from Act 2 of Hamlet. Now, this is by no means a complete summary. There are lots of things that happen in this act. This is just a short discussion of some of those key points which often tend to come up in contextual questions. So it's definitely not all the details about the act. You definitely need to read that yourself. This is just to summarize some of those key points. Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play, so there's a lot of details. So we're just going to discuss some of those really important ones. So Act 2, Scene 1. This scene starts off with Polonius sending his servant to spy on his son Laertes. He has sent off Laertes in the previous act to university in France, and now he sends his servant after him to go and spy on him. This definitely tells us a little bit about Polonius's character, and it sort of foreshadows how he's going to get involved with Claudius, Gertrude, and Hamlet, and trying to figure out that whole Hamlet madness scenario. So he sends off a servant to go and spy on his son in France. He's always sort of meddling in things, trying to get information on people. And then we have Ophelia comes to her father Polonius, and she tells him that she has been keeping her distance from Hamlet because that is what her father had told her to do, but that he came to see her and that he seemed depraved, he seemed mad. So she tells Polonius this. Polonius takes this on board and he decides he's going to talk to the king about this. He's going to talk to Claudius about this. He thinks he's found the solution or the reason as to why Hamlet is mad. He thinks it's because Hamlet is violently and desperately in love with Ophelia. Moving to Act 2, Scene 2, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive at the palace in Denmark. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are two of my favorite characters in Hamlet because they're sort of this pair of idiots who Hamlet is going to have a really fun time trying to he makes fun of them without them even sort of realizing. He really mocks them and sends them in spirals with all the riddles that he tells them. But I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive. They are Hamlet's childhood friends, and they have been invited to Denmark, to the palace, by Claudius. Claudius promises them a reward for figuring out what is wrong with Hamlet. He thinks that bringing his childhood friends is going to help them get to the bottom of why Hamlet is acting mad, why he's acting depraved. Polonius claims to Claudius that Hamlet's madness is due to his love for Ophelia. Sorry, just to go back a second. Claudius promises them a reward, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are very happy to do Claudius's bidding. They are not worried about betraying their friend at all. They're like, yes, we will do it. They want to sort of suck up to the king and be honored by him. Going to that next point again, Polonius claims to Claudius that Hamlet's madness is due to his love for Ophelia. We then have a little side point where we see that the Norway invasion seems to be under control, seems to have been dealt with. And there we can see a little bit that Claudius maybe is a good statesman in the sense that he has dealt with this issue of Norway, at least for the moment. Polonius suggests that in order to test his theory of whether Hamlet is in love with Ophelia, Claudius and Polonius should hide and watch an exchange between them. Polonius then encounters Hamlet, and Hamlet acts mad around him and somewhat aggressively. And Polonius is shocked by this exchange, but he also recognizes that there is method to his madness. He sees that actually, yes, Hamlet is acting mad, but there seems to be something behind it. There seems to be some sort of planning. It seems to be intentional. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern then they visit Hamlet, and Hamlet immediately figures out the real reason why they're there. He immediately figures out that they are there to spy on him and that actually they are doing Claudius's bidding. So he's not honest with them at all. As I said earlier, he sends them around in riddles. He doesn't really talk much sense to them. They can't figure out what's wrong with him, why he's acting mad. Then an acting troupe arrives. They've been invited to cheer Hamlet up, and Hamlet thinks this is a great idea. He arranges for the troupe to perform the play The Murder of Gonzago the next day, and this is part of his plan to figure out and to prove that Claudius is actually the one who killed King Hamlet, because then Hamlet will feel comfortable taking revenge and killing him on the ghost's orders. But he wants to make sure that it is truly the case and that this ghost wasn't just impersonating his father. Hamlet reflects on his inaction and determines that the play will allow him to determine Claudius's guilt. So he's starting to get a little bit frustrated with himself that he hasn't actually acted yet and he hasn't actually taken revenge, but he says this play is going to be the proof that he needs in order to act on it, in order to get revenge and to avenge his father's death. I hope that you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to go through some key points. We're going to try and summarize Act 3 of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Now, Hamlet is a really detailed play, so this video is not going to cover all the specific details of Act 3, but it's going to try get across those major plot points, those key points that they tend to ask about in contextual questions in exams. So we're just going to go through those key points together and hopefully gain a better understanding of the plot line and maybe a bit of information about the characters and the themes. Act 3, Scene 1. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern report back to Claudius and Gertrude that Hamlet is still depressed and mad and they can't figure out why. Polonius tells Ophelia to stand and wait for Hamlet to come by. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern don't have an answer for Claudius, and so then Claudius circles back to Polonius's idea. Polonius's idea is that Hamlet's madness is due to him being in love with his daughter Ophelia, so he and Claudius hide behind a tapestry and observe the interaction between Hamlet and Ophelia. Hamlet wanders towards Ophelia, contemplating death. So throughout Hamlet, we see that yes, there's a lot of story going on, but we also get a lot of insight into Hamlet's head through all of his monologues and soliloquies, where he talks about what he thinks, and he's very depressed at this point, and so he's thinking a lot about death, and he contemplates this as he's sort of walking by. Yes, it adds to his idea of madness because he's walking and sort of talking to himself and talking about all these sort of serious issues, but at the same time we can see that actually some of it is truthful, like he is thinking these thoughts about death. Ophelia tells Hamlet that she has some things to return to him, such as letters and gifts that he gave her, and Hamlet really goes on the offensive or on the defensive, and he starts to question her character and her honesty. Hamlet claims that he loved Ophelia once at some point, but that now she should go to a nunnery to escape sin. And he actually mentions this quite a few times. He tells her to take herself to a nunnery to escape from sin. Hamlet asks where Polonius is. He suspects that Polonius is behind this interaction, and of course he is correct, but Ophelia resists this and says that he's not there. Hamlet continues to insult Ophelia, really upsetting her, and leaves. Ophelia is heartbroken that Hamlet's good character has been overwhelmed by insanity. And here we can sort of start asking ourselves this question of, is Hamlet's madness really fake? Like he said it was in Act 1 that he was going to, act crazy in order to enact this revenge, or has it really overwhelmed him now? Has it really truly become him because of how he acts towards Ophelia? So is he truly mad, or is he still putting on this act that's sort of ambiguous? And that's for us to figure out and decide what evidence there is to prove whichever stance we are going to be trying to prove in an essay or in a contextual question. Claudius sees that Hamlet's madness is not due to love and resolves to send him into exile, as he is proving to be dangerous. Why is he proving to be dangerous? Because Claudius thinks maybe he's onto him, maybe he's figured out this whole thing. We need to get Hamlet away before he threatens the throne. Act 3, Scene 2. The players, the actors, they prepare for the performance, and Hamlet presents the first player with a new scene he has written to perform as part of the play. This new part is really similar to the events which he thinks has happened based on what the ghost has said. And he wants this play to mirror those events so that he can tell how Claudius and Gertrude react, and from their reactions he's going to try and figure out whether they are guilty or not. Hamlet confides in Horatio. This is the only person he really seems to trust in Denmark. What he is trying to do and what he's trying to prove, and he asks Horatio to judge Claudius's disposition during the performance and assess what he thinks about it. Does he think Claudius is guilty? The performance begins showing a king and queen in love. Gertrude claims that the queen is being a bit much. Claudius asks Hamlet if he's seen this play before and whether or not it is offensive, to which Hamlet coyly responds that the play is inoffensive to those who are innocent. We then see a player and actor pouring poison into the player king's ear, and at that point Claudius abruptly leaves, which is exactly what Hamlet wanted, because now he's shown his guilt by abruptly leaving this performance. Hamlet sees this as proof of his guilt, and Gertrude also leaves. She storms off, she's really upset, and she requests to speak with Hamlet because she is very upset about the situation. So here we can see things are escalating, but Hamlet finally has his proof here. So theoretically, he should be able to avenge his father after this, because he has proof that the ghost was real and that it was actually him, and that Claudius is the one who killed his father. But of course, things are not going to go smoothly. Act 3, Scene 3. Claudius speaks to Rosencrantz Guildenstern now, and he tells them that he is sending them along with Hamlet to England. When Claudius is alone, he prays and admits to killing King Hamlet. He wishes to be forgiven, but he's not so repentant because he doesn't want to give up the prizes of his sin. He doesn't want to give up his queen or the throne. So he wants to be forgiven, but he says, can I be forgiven even if I don't have to give these things up, give these things back? Hamlet sees Claudius praying and intends to enact his revenge, but then he stops short of killing him because he sees that Claudius is praying, and he thinks that if he kills him while he's praying, then Claudius may go to heaven. And the whole thing with the ghost was that the ghost is sort of roaming the earth because he's been killed unprepared. He didn't have time to repent to be sent to heaven, and so he's left to sort of wander. And Hamlet doesn't want to give Claudius the satisfaction or the sort of the he doesn't want to do a good deed and kill Claudius while he's praying, because then he'll be sent to heaven and he won't have to suffer. He won't have to suffer just like his father has to suffer. So he doesn't kill him, and this is very important because once again it shows that level of inaction from Hamlet, his indecisiveness, but also his overthinking in this case. He's overthinking leading to inaction. Act 3, Scene 4. Polonius hides behind a tapestry to eavesdrop on Gertrude's conversation with Claudius. Gertrude tells Hamlet off for upsetting Claudius. Hamlet rebukes Gertrude for her hasty marriage. Gertrude fears Hamlet's madness. Hamlet then hears a noise from behind the tapestry, and thinking it's Claudius spying on them, he stabs the tapestry, which lands up killing Polonius. As Hamlet continues rebuking his mother, the ghost appears to him, the ghost of King Hamlet appears to him and reminds him of what he said in the first act. He said, "You must avenge my death. That is your true task. No, don't criticize your mother. Leave Gertrude alone." Gertrude is sure now that Hamlet is mad. She had her suspicions at first, but this ghost instant proves it because she cannot see the ghost. Only Hamlet can see the ghost. Hamlet knows at this point that he's bound for England and that Claudius has probably arranged for his death, but that he plans to outsmart him. So obviously, Claudius has told him he's going to England for some sort of diplomatic reason, but Hamlet has figured out that it probably means that he's sending him to his death. But he says over here he already plans to outsmart him. And then just to prove Gertrude's fears further about her son's madness, he then drags Polonius's body out of Gertrude's room in a sort of very sort of inhumane and mad way. So in Act 3, we definitely see Hamlet's madness at sort of its peak. We can understand that most of the characters do determine him to be mad, and as I said earlier, it's sort of up to us to question whether his madness is true, whether it's actually fake, or whether it's actually got the best of him and he has sort of turned mad. Remember, whatever argument you make, just make sure you back it up with evidence. We see the themes of indecisiveness, of inaction, and overthinking very much prevalent in this act, and this is going to set us up for the following two acts where we're going to have the big duel, the big battle, and we're going to see how all of these characters' lives end and how all the strings of the plot work together to form a very tragic conclusion. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing Act 4 of Shakespeare's Hamlet. We're just going to be looking at some main plot points. We're not going to go through it in too much detail, but just those main key points that tend to come up in contextual questions and that are really important to know in terms of the general sequence of events in the play. Act 4, Scene 1. In this scene, Gertrude tells Claudius about how Hamlet killed Polonius and how she thinks he's really gone mad. Claudius reassures her that Hamlet will be sent away. Claudius then sends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to fetch Polonius's body to try and figure out from Hamlet where he has put the body. Scene 2, Hamlet has hidden Polonius's body and he refuses to outrightly say where he's put the body. He speaks in riddles and codes with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, much to their frustration. Scene 3, Claudius consults advisors to determine the threat of Hamlet. Hamlet refuses to outrightly tell Claudius where Polonius's body is. Claudius orders Hamlet to be sent away for his safety, apparently, but it is revealed that he has actually sent a letter to the King of England for Hamlet to be executed, just as Hamlet had anticipated. Scene 4. Forntress's army have now arrived in Denmark, as an agreement has been struck up for them to be allowed to pass through Denmark to capture a small piece of Polish land, and Hamlet considers how some men act without thinking adequately, which is quite an interesting thought that he has, because he is guilty of the opposite, right? He is guilty of thinking too much and not acting swiftly. Scene 5, we see that madness has overcome Ophelia. She sings while she's conversing with Gertrude, and to Gertrude it seems like a tale that doesn't make sense. Ophelia's madness is seemingly derived from Hamlet's treatment of her, the fact he's been sent away, but also her father's brutal death. Laertes then arrives. Remember, Laertes is Polonius' son, Ophelia's brother, and he comes in really angry at Claudius because he thinks that Claudius is responsible for his father's death, and he seeks to avenge his father. And at this point in the story, we get a really interesting, reflective storyline. It mirrors Hamlet's own storyline of him trying to avenge his father, and now we're going to see Laertes embark on the very same mission of trying to avenge his father. Initially, he's targeting Claudius, but later we're going to see he's going to target Hamlet in his way, just like Hamlet targeted Claudius in trying to avenge his father. So we have this sort of mirroring going on, which is really interesting. And we also have this introduction of this theme of like father-son relationships, because we have Laertes and Polonius, then we have Hamlet and King Hamlet, and then we can also have, in a way, Hamlet and King Claudius, because Claudius claims to be his father now that he's married his mother. Claudius says that he is not Polonius' killer and that he and Laertes should work together to avenge his death, so he's very quick to pass off the blame onto Hamlet. He does not want to question Laertes to question him. He wants to be on Laertes' side. He wants also the people of Denmark to be on his side so that he can continue to rule them. Remember as well, one of the reasons why Claudius sends Hamlet away. Why he claims that he's dangerous is he's dangerous to his own position of power, because the people of Denmark like Hamlet, and he is obviously also the rightful king, and so he's worried that Hamlet gets an inkling of this, and Hamlet also figures out that he did kill King Hamlet, and so that's one of the reasons why he sends him away. In scene 6, Horatio receives a letter from Hamlet that the ship that he was on was raided by pirates, and after striking up a deal with the pirates, he is set to return to Denmark. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, though, are still en route to England. And then we have scene 7. In this scene, Claudius convinces Laertes that he is innocent in Polonius' death, and that the only thing he could do in order to sort of rebuke Hamlet or to punish Hamlet for Polonius' death was to send Hamlet into exile, as Hamlet is beloved by the people and much loved by his mother. Claudius then receives a letter that Hamlet has returned to Denmark, and so he sees this as an opportunity. He uses flattery and manipulation to convince Laertes to partake in a duel with Hamlet. So he uses his manipulative skills once again over here, and he's going to try and get Laertes sort of to fight his battle for him. Gertrude then enters, conveying the news that Ophelia has drowned, and this is sort of further adding to Laertes' upset and his grief, because Hamlet is not only responsible for killing his father, but also he contributed to Ophelia going mad. It's sort of unsure, it's left ambiguous in terms of whether Ophelia has drowned by accident or if this was purposeful, due to her madness and due to her grief. So that ambiguity is also important, and it adds to the grief that Laertes is feeling. I hope that you found that video helpful. As I said, it was just sort of going through those key points that you need to know. There's definitely more analysis and more interesting information, so definitely read up on that. I hope that you will like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we're going to be summarizing some key points from Act 5 of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So we're not going to go through all the details, we're just going through those key plot points that are really important to know in terms of following the sequence of events in the story. So Act 5, Scene 1, we start off the scene where we see grave diggers. They are preparing Ophelia's grave, and they are debating the circumstances around her death, whether her drowning was accidental or intentional. Hamlet and Horatio then approach. Hamlet picks up a skull which has been sort of dug up and chucked aside by one of the grave diggers, and he contemplates the nature of death. So that's a major theme that runs throughout the play. Obviously, it is a tragedy, and so there's a lot of death that happens, and we're going to see in the next scene even more deaths occur. But what we also see is that Hamlet has a lot of contemplation, a lot of monologues and soliloquies where he contemplates death. And here is one of those famous scenes. Whenever you even think of Hamlet, or if you search it up, you see that picture of Hamlet holding the skull and contemplating the nature of death and the cycle of life. The funeral procession then for Ophelia arrives and comes towards the grave. Hamlet, remember, is returning from the ship, right? He's just got off the boat. He's re-arrived in Denmark, or he's just come back to Denmark, and he is unaware that Ophelia has died. And when Hamlet sees it's Ophelia, he is absolutely devastated and filled with grief. Ophelia's brother Laertes is also filled with grief, and he has jumped into the grave and is crying and weeping really loudly. And so when Hamlet sees this, he comes out from behind sort of the tree where he's been hiding and observing, and he jumps into the grave as well and starts weeping, and he starts fighting Laertes, and they start comparing how sad they truly are that Ophelia has died. So in this moment, we can see that maybe Hamlet's feelings towards Ophelia were quite genuine, and maybe he was saying all those things to really try and sell that idea that he was mad, to try and get a confession out of Claudius. The fight is broken up, but both of them are still quite angry with each other and vow to get revenge. Act 5, Scene 2, Hamlet recounts his story of his escape to Horatio, and he tells how he actually swapped the letters, that he found the letter that Claudius had given Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which had ordered his own execution, and he had changed the letter to now order Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's execution by the King of England. So in this case, this example, this really shows us how Even though Hamlet is full of inaction, right? If we think about this whole play, and it's one of his sort of tragic flaws or fatal flaws that leads to him becoming a tragic hero, is that he's just full of inaction, right? He never actually kills Claudius. If he had just done it in the first act or the second act, then this whole story wouldn't have occurred, and the whole tragedy, all the other tragedies wouldn't have occurred. But here he actually shows action, and the same case as when he kills Polonius, right? He shows a sense of irrationality and needless aggression. And so we can see that he has these bouts of inaction, which is sort of replaced, or in order to mitigate that, he also has these bouts of irrational actions, right? Where he does these irrationally aggressive things to sort of to counter his frustration with his inaction. And Horatio is actually quite shocked at this, at what he recounts, as even though he doesn't really like these friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Hamlet doesn't really like them. It's quite a serious thing to do to order them to their deaths. Osric then comes in, he is a servant, and he announces the king's idea for a duel to take place between Laertes and Hamlet. Hamlet readily agrees to this. The duel is arranged, and as Hamlet and Laertes shake hands, Hamlet apologizes to Laertes and blames his actions on his madness. So remember, Laertes is quite mad at Hamlet. He's been responsible for killing Polonius' father, and he thinks that he's also might be responsible for Ophelia's death as well. And so Hamlet does apologize, but he also blames it on his actions, so it's not perhaps a true apology in that way. The fencing begins, and Gertrude mistakenly drinks the wine which Claudius has poisoned. So Claudius and Laertes have plotted and planned, and they've decided that Laertes is going to poison the tip of his sword to make sure that Hamlet is going to die. And Claudius, as a backup, is going to make sure that if Hamlet wins the duel, he's going to offer him some wine to drink, and that wine will be poisonous. He does offer the wine to drink to Hamlet when he wins one of the rounds, but Hamlet refuses. Gertrude does not know about this plan. She mistakenly drinks the wine, which Claudius has poisoned, and subsequently dies. Hamlet and Laertes, in their battle, in their scuffle, they both land up dropping their swords and swapping swords. So now Hamlet is left wielding Laertes' poison-tipped sword. Laertes is then wounded by his own sword, and once he realizes that he's going to die, he confesses that he was in on Claudius's plan with the poisoned wine and the sword. Hamlet gets really angry in this moment, and he goes and he stabs Claudius. He also forces him to drink the wine to make sure that Claudius is going to die. Hamlet then forgives Laertes. He then falls to the ground because he's also been touched by the poisoned sword, and he realizes he's going to die as well. And in that moment, he makes Horatio promise to tell his story to the world. Fortinbras then arrives after Hamlet has just died, and he takes over the Danish throne. So the ending of this, obviously, we knew going into the story that it's tragedy. I mean, the actual original title of the play was The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. So the tragedy can be seen because most of our main characters land up dead. Another aspect of a Shakespearean tragedy is that we have a tragic hero, and Hamlet is a tragic hero. So a tragic hero is the protagonist who is heroic, who is a good person, but they have one fatal flaw. They have one thing that sort of undermines that goodness and leads to their downfall. And so in Hamlet's case, it could be the fact that he is indecisive and that he overthinks. Ultimately, he's a good man with all the best intentions, but that tragic flaw, that idea of the fact that he overthinks, he's indecisive, and he's predisposed to inaction lead to his downfall and ultimately the downfall of others. I hope that you found this video helpful in terms of summarizing those key plot points. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.